Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for showing up. And I'll shortly explain what I mean by this topic, what I mean by lazy communication. It's not an industry-wide term or anything. I researched a little bit on the net, but I couldn't find a term for what I wanted to convey. So I just called it lazy communication. And some of the things I'm going to say, I've been equally guilty of them as well. But as I say, awareness is the first step towards change. So, and some of the examples might appear familiar to us, but they don't reflect any particular situation or any particular experience. So it's semi-hypothetical. With those disclaimers out of the way. So I think what I want to convey is best illustrated by starting off with a couple of examples. And this is from everyday professional life. So let's take an example of two technical people having a conversation, and this might be about estimations. So two developers discussing an estimate, and let's say there is a difference of opinion. Somebody says it's a 3-pointer, the other guy feels it's a 1-pointer. And usually, most of the time, things get resolved pretty amicably. They just say, okay, why do you think it's a 1 and it's a 3? But then, this is more often the case when the people having this difference are already very comfortable with each other, or there is a very equal sort of peer relationship in place. Sometimes this is not the case. So there is a little bit of a power relationship. So I'll come to what I mean by this. It might be, one of the guys or girls has spent a lot of time in ThoughtWorks already, and the other person is a newcomer. So the other person is a little tentative with respect to defending his estimate. Right? And so this person, the tenured person, might ask, okay, so why do you think it's a 3? And the other person might say, he might explain some edge cases that he or she has come up with, and say, there are these things, we might have to try these approaches, and then there might be these complications, etc. It's possible. And a number of times, the other guy or the person gets it, and they agree that it's a 3, or the person is able to convince the person that, we don't, given this context, we don't really need to worry about these things, so let's go with the 1. But sometimes it does happen that the tenured person just tries to close the conversation, gets a little impatient or something, tries to close the conversation with, hey, it's not rocket science, we can do it, it's a 1. So, and then the other person is a little tentative and doesn't try to challenge him. He feels that, okay, he's growing impatient, or I'm way off the mark. Or he might say something like, oh, let's not over-engineer it. Right? So this is what I mean by using these kind of stock phrases to kind of settle an argument, right? And when you try to use, so using stock phrases by itself is bad, but that is not what I'm referring to here. But especially when you use it to settle a conversation, when there is some sort of a power relationship between the parties having a conversation, that's especially bad, and that's what I want to talk about. Right? So that was a technical example. A non-technical example might be, a team member voicing some concerns about some situation on the project to maybe somebody much more senior, maybe somebody in the client services team, right? And it might be regarding the infrastructure, it might be regarding how responsive the client is, working conditions, it might be regarding different things, right? And usually the people on the client services team are experienced enough and and mature enough to acknowledge those concerns and try to see if they can do something about it. Sometimes it also happens that they acknowledge the concerns, fine, But now this team member tries to push for action, right? He says, okay, you acknowledged it, but now what are we going to do about it, right? And most of the time, if it's a retrospective kind of situation, we agree, we come up with some, okay, this is what we can do. But also there are occasions where, again, depending on the equation between the two parties involved, this CST person might say, you know what, I know the situation is less than ideal, but we got to be flexible at this point, right? And use that as a way to end the conversation. Or something else like, you know, let's take baby steps, and you know, things are not going to change overnight. Yeah, these kind of things. So we tend to use these kind of stock phrases as a means of settling the argument, right? And that's what I'm going to talk about where it might be coming from and what it might lead to. So this is what I mean by, I refer to as lazy communication. That if we are a little more empathetic towards that situation and a little less impatient, we might actually be able to get to the bottom of, you know, I have some examples about, you know, about these things, but we might actually, what is the casualty here? Why is this a problem, right? Because people, of course, there are going to be some valid objections. Like, I don't have all the time in the day to keep listening to grievances and arguing with people and all, and we have to get on with it. And so there are difficult people and all those kind of things. So we'll address them. But sometimes what happens is that there is a genuine opportunity for shared understanding to happen over there by delving a little into the specifics and not stopping with generalities. And when we don't make use of this opportunity, and when this becomes a repeated pattern, what happens? The two parties develop impressions about each other. They develop prejudices about each other, right? One might think, oh, that guy is an alarmist. The other guy might think, oh, that guy is arrogant, he never listens to me, right? And then you have a tenure in thought works, and if you develop these kind of prejudices with each other, it's not going to be very healthy. So yeah, I'm not used to looking around here. So some power equations, these kind of power equations can arise in different situations. They may or may not arise, okay? Sometimes everything is fine, but then there are some subtle implicit power relationships between tenured thought worker and new hire. You know who has the upper hand here, right? An experienced consultant and a university grad, a tech lead and a team member, a member who is responsible for staffing, PSM, and a consultant, a tech lead and a project manager. And it extends at all levels, right? So, of course, we are not a traditional hierarchical organization, but then yes, we do have roles and responsibilities, and we have things that we are accountable for, and we have corresponding authority for it. And so every conversation between sets of people like this, there is a hidden power equation that we should acknowledge.
I'm curious about tech lead and project manager, which direction the power flows.
Typical consultant speak, it depends. If it's a superstar a tech lead and a fairly new project manager who's learning the ropes of agile or whatever, then
Chirag, you played both roles. You should be answering that question yourself.
I've always found myself on the other end of the road.
You basically holding all the cards, whether you're a tech lead or the project manager, right?
So, what is the problem here, right? Sometimes the guy at the receiving end of these talk phrases and at the receiving end of, see, the other guy doesn't get to decide how to end the conversation, right? When he sees somebody saying, hey, let's not over-engineer it, it's not just the phrase, he also detects the tone, and he sees impatience there, or so he's like, okay, like, am I being really stupid here? Right, and what does he or she might take all these implications, right? Okay, like, it's like the other guy saying, okay, I've given you polite enough hearing, and it's time to like shut up and get on with it, right? And you're being unreasonable if you still don't get my position, and you know, I want you to get going without any further argument. Time up, basically. You know? And in some of these conversations, it's also okay. I'll come to this at a later stage. You don't always get a face-to-face opportunity to raise these concerns, right? And you have to do it in a group situation. And in a group situation, the moment the speaker or the person who's addressing the group starts using these kind of stock phrases to settle a conversation, the person in the group is even more on the back foot, right? He doesn't want to waste the whole group's time and he'll appear argumentative and all that. So he just shut up. So yeah, we'll just explore some of these stock phrases, right? So some of this we already touched upon, right? And this occurs mostly in a technical context. It's not rocket science, right? Neither are we rocket scientists. Let's not over-engineer it, right? What is being implied? I mean, is there common agreement on what is to be engineered? Is there common enough agreement? Let's keep it simple, right? And oftentimes, what this really means is the shut up and accept my estimate and design. Some more, the non-technical context. Yeah, I know the situation is less than ideal. Yes, it's not perfect, but let's be realistic. Welcome to the real world. So, this is mostly like somebody raising concerns about something, complaining, etc. And then I grow impatient. Yeah, I've been guilty of this myself. So, I want to put an end to this. And what do I probably mean? Stop protesting. Right? Let's do the right thing. And I have never encountered this phrase when the speaker means let's do the thing that you are suggesting. Let's take the middle path. Let's take a balanced approach, right? Now, I agree there are a lot of situations where people really need to hear this in context with supporting arguments, etc. Because what they might be pushing for might really be not the balanced thing, right? And they might not be considering all aspects of the situation. So there are right usages for this. And to give you a trivial example, I'm sorry. So let's take the middle path and let's take a balanced approach. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a correct example right now, but I want to give you the thing where this absolutely makes no sense, right? So anecdotally, a ThoughtWorks agile coach goes into another organization and starts talking about the things that we talk about, engineering practices, etc. And it turns out that the client sponsor and his managers, they are particularly interested in adopting, say, unit testing, right? And so they begin to talk about it, and sometime during the conversation, they actually the two parties realize something. They realize that the client people, when they mean testing, they think of all testing to be done by the testing team, right? Whereas the coach, when he says unit testing, he knows he's talking about developer testing. For him, unit testing doesn't make any sense if not done by the development team, right? And so this creates a bit of a conflict where the people on the client side, they are just about opening up to agile practices and all. They want to do unit testing, but they thought the budget is going to come from the testing team, right? And here is the agile coach telling that no, unit testing is all about developers writing unit tests as they write code. So it makes no sense to call it unit testing or write unit tests by developers writing code and then passing it on to some other team to write the unit test, right? And so they reach a bit of an embargo there. It's like no way forward. And then, somebody on the client side comes up with a bright idea and says, you know what, I mean, he's trying to argue, negotiate and say, see, there are two extremes. On one hand, we don't write any unit tests. On the other hand, you are taking an extreme position that all unit tests have to be written by developers. What we are suggesting is a middle path. We are saying we want to do unit testing, but let it be done by the QAs. Why are you so dogmatic about Agile? Why are you so hung up on your position? Let's go this way, see what the results are, right? And then the problem here is, if they fail, they'll blame unit testing, right? Unit testing doesn't work. So there are some situations where blindly talking about middle path and balanced approach absolutely makes no sense, right? You need to really understand what's being talked about and then suggest these things. So yeah, I mean, there are some times where it really means I'm taking a wild 50-50 solution because I totally don't understand the context. Yeah. Let's think out of the box. Let's be creative. It's like the person hearing this should really thank the speaker, right? Because so far he's been sitting inside the box and only considering things that occur to him inside the box. And he has been given a splendid hint that he should maybe consider stepping out of the box and thinking. So what it really means is, yeah, I mean they're stuck, and the person who is giving all these homilies has no clue what to do. Let's be flexible. What does that really more? I mean, in a lot of times I agree. See, I'm not saying like in all situations where these phrases are used, they are used in the wrong way. Not at all. But I have seen a number of occasions where they are used in the wrong way. And it's especially harmful when they are used to settle the conversation over there. If the guy had an opportunity to talk further about it, saying yes I am being flexible, I want to be flexible, here is the thing, etc., etc., then that's fine. This is just a odd phrase in the middle of a conversation. But when it's used as if like I'm getting impatient, let's be flexible. I mean that most often means you bend to my wishes, right? And like I won't bend any muscle to try to make things better for you. It's not going to happen overnight, right? So again, it's like okay. So again, this is not got to do with any reality here, but just an example occurred to me. Let's say somebody in professional services wants to move to studios, right? And then there is general acknowledgement that okay, fine, you fit and you will get to go, but I can't make any promises, right? But this guy or girl is fairly interested and keeps following up, right? And if he hears something like this, he might understand that what, I'm not going to work towards making it happen anytime soon. So yeah, have I missed any? Do you want to contribute anything?
So right now you are asking this question from all of us.
Yeah. Alright, that was my answer. Okay, so I mean, I'm not saying there is a problem because they are cliches. Yes, they are cliches, all right, and that is a problem in its own right. But that's not really what I'm addressing, right? But yeah, I mean, I also don't want to totally ignore the fact that they are cliches, right? What are cliches? Overused phrases that we tend to use without thinking, right? And there is good research that states that language influences thinking, right? Language influences the way we think. So if we get very used to using unoriginal language, then what will follow is our thoughts also will be unoriginal. So, but again, that's not what I'm complaining about here, right? I'm complaining about using these stock phrases as a means to settle arguments, as a means to say that what, I've had enough, let's just get on with it. So yeah, lazy communication particularly harmful when stock phrases are used to clinch an argument. So we've all seen this slide, right? As part of inceptions, somewhere along the way we tell our client that this is what we are going to do over the next 1 week or whatever, and we start off a different way and end up here saying that at the end of all of our conversations and activities, we'll end up with shared understanding. So we all are very good at articulating the value of shared understanding to our clients, right? And but when we are in situations which just described. When we use these stock phrases to clinch arguments, we have essentially killed an opportunity for shared understanding, right? Because obviously that other guy has a different worldview, and if only we took a little bit of time, or maybe not now, but maybe later, and kind of empathized with that guy, and maybe gave him a clearer understanding of why things are the way they are, or maybe there is every now and then you do get a new perspective from the other person who you're not really expecting to get any new information from, but every now and then it happens, and if you're open to that possibility, I have realized, I mean, later in my career that yeah, it does matter. But the shared understanding, as we often show, only results from iteration and convergence, right? So you have to iterate. Iterate as in, yeah, you might have to keep talking about the same thing from different angles and perspectives. That's when shared understanding happens, right? And when we don't do this, and when we resort to lazy communication, using these kind of stock phrases to clinch the argument over and over again, then people just remain with their mental models. There is no sharing of the mental models, right? This guy thinks the situation is a square and the other guy thinks the situation is a triangle, and the twain shall never meet. And it gives rise to prejudices, right? One person thinks, oh, this guy is ultra conservative, and the other person thinks this guy is aggressive. So yeah, why the word lazy? So we are shying away from delving into the matter at hand under one pretext or another, right? So when I say don't over-engineer without making sure that we both really understand what it is that we are engineering and what are the various forces and variables at play, and we're just passing a comment, don't over-engineer, I'm saying you are over-engineering. When I say let's be flexible, I'm implying you are not flexible. When I say let's be realistic, I'm saying you are being idealistic or whatever. So who takes the initiative? Somebody might say, you know what, why can't the other guy speak up if he's feeling so bad about it? Right? But again, it's a subtle power relationship, and it is up to the person with the upper hand to take the initiative and try to achieve shared understanding there, right? And not depart with a stock phrase. This is one aspect of true leadership. And why might the other guy not do it? Because yeah, if he's in part of a group, like you're doing some kind of project all hands and a few members of the client services team at one end and the rest of the project team at the other end, he doesn't want to be seen as argumentative in front of a group, and he doesn't get too many one-on-one face opportunities. This is only opportunity. He said something, he got shot down, so he shuts up. And he doesn't want his peers to think that he's managing upwards, right? If he comes back again and says, okay, I want to have a meeting with you, and he does that again and again, people might think that, oh, okay, like, you know what's going on here. So yeah, talking of leadership, some of you might be familiar with this model of situational leadership. It was introduced to us as part of the leadership development program that some of us participated in. And it says that there are 4 styles of leadership, right? Applicable to 4 categories of people. So you start with being directive. Directive is in other words, very close to pure command and control. Do as I say, right? And this is mostly applicable to people with what is called as low competence and low commitment, right? And I don't think anybody in ThoughtWorks fits into that category, right? Next is coaching. So high directive, but also highly supportive. And then next is supporting, which is low directive and high supportive. And finally, you get to, if at all you get to delegating, which is low directive and low supportive, right? And people, I mean, that I just want to make a note on the last point, right? People think they are delegating when they just delegate execution, but that's not at all delegating, right? That's much more closer to directing. To delegate, you have to delegate authority as well as accountability. So, given that ThoughtWorks is an organization that mostly rests in these 2 squares, when we use these kind of lazy communication behavior, when we use stock phrases to settle an argument, we are essentially adopting this type of behavior, directive behavior, right? We are basically implying, oh, we've had this allotted time of 5-minute conversation, I don't agree with you, and just get on with it. So most of us already know this stuff, right? And still there are times when we fall into this trap and we adopt these behaviors. Why? The most common reason that I can think of is, we don't want to waste a lot of time arguing endlessly, and we very easily transfer the burden of responsibility to the other person, saying that person was being a difficult person at that point of time. He was just not understanding my perspective. Okay. But the thing that we are missing out is maybe in that conversation there is a subtle power relationship, and I am on the better side of that relationship. Therefore, it's my responsibility, and it's completely within my domain to act differently. And sometimes this might be just an excuse to hide our own shortcomings, right? And what might they be? We might not have the skills to effectively articulate our position in a consensus dialogue. We might be very good at understanding the big picture and knowing exactly what to do, but we might just not be able to articulate it well in a group meeting, and able to convince able to influence the group that this is the right thing to do, and therefore we get challenged more and more, and we get frustrated, and then we put our foot down. Or because of our own history, we might be more authoritarian and less given to consensus making. Digging deeper, we might have insecurities that we actually don't know a lot about what is being talked about, and we want to end it in a superficial manner, and we are insecure that if we get into depth, we will be exposed. Or, it might just be that there is something hidden agenda, and that's why we are doing it. This is of course decreasing order of probability, but I don't want to completely rule it out. So people might have objections to some of the things I said here, and these are all very legitimate objections, saying that these are okay ways to deal with difficult people, or maybe I have taken all these phrases too seriously and I've made a whole ex-con topic about it, or I'm too touchy, I need to have slightly thicker skin, or I lack a sense of humor, right? I accept that there are situations where this might be true, but again I come back to that thing, that if you're trying to close a conversation with these stock phrases and it also matters the tone in which we deliver them, how much impatience we are displaying, etc. If you're doing that, then I disagree that I'm taking it seriously or I'm touchy, etc. And this also reminds me of an incident. It's somewhat related, I think fairly related, about the RubyConf incident that happened a couple of years ago, right? Where one of the presenters included pornographic material in his presentation, and a number of people in the audience were outraged, and they protested. And when they protested, surprisingly, the organizers and some of the Ruby community luminaries, they actually defended the presentation, saying, come on, have a sense of humor and don't get so serious about it. And they were pretty much the same arguments they used to defend that presentation, right? And this provoked a strong reaction within ThoughtWorks also, and a number of prominent bloggers blogged about it to actually express solidarity with the people who were outraged with this, and try to articulate in a very non-emotional manner why it is a problem, right? And one of the posts and one of the sentences that I particularly liked, I'll quote, was from Martin Fowler, right? He was responding to this allegation from the people who defended the material, saying humor is an important tool to puncture the self-important, right? And I think there was a very good sentence here that I like a lot. He says, yes, that's true, but only if the power relationship is in the right direction, right? Someone of lower power poking fun at a powerful person is a different situation to someone with lots of power skewering someone with little power, right? And I think this is one of the hallmarks of an open culture and a non-hierarchical organization, because a number of big enterprises that I have visited, it always works in the other direction. I've seen almost nobody in big enterprises and huge organizations dares poke fun of their superiors, right? Whereas it is considered a rule that the senior will occasionally poke fun of his juniors and his team, and people are expected to laugh and humor that guy, right? And that's how you get a good relationship. Like if you sulk at his humor, like you're bad. So and I think if people have objections to lazy communication on similar grounds, I think there is a parallel here, right? So. So I had not rehearsed this talk and I just realized that I'm at the end of it. And I was not at all sure how this will go, so I'm really happy and thankful that you're still with me. So yeah, comments, welcome, we have plenty of time.
I think all those thinking of stock phrases to use.
We'll have to come up with new ones now.
Or now we have a list of phrases which we can use.
Yeah, look who stopped.
Is that another stock?
I am not close to conversation.
After a sentence.
Awkward silence.
Stock phrase.
What people should do.
What people should do?
In
Okay.
terms of
Yeah.
avoiding those situations. I mean, one part is okay, just being aware of it is good enough.
Yeah.
But if people are very used to of using those things, even sometimes.
So, yeah, okay. Yeah, please use the mic and repeat it.
So, are there some mechanism through which you can be aware that now you are using this,
Yeah.
and especially in the power relationship.
Okay, so as I said, right, using is not so much a problem as trying to settle an argument or a conversation with that. So, it's okay to have these phrases in your vocabulary as long as that doesn't become the end of the conversation, right? Like, go away, let's not over-engineer it, right? Or, stop complaining, I know it's not perfect, but let's be flexible. And use that as a means of shutting the lid on it. So, even if you're aware of this, and we can watch body language. I mean, eyes are not going to light up when you say that. So
the key thing is the conversation should not end at that point.
yes, yeah.
So at least one sentence after that.
That's the tolerance
I guess my interpretation of what you're saying is almost that when you are at the higher end of a power equation, you almost need to allow. When you are at a higher end of a power equation, you almost need to allow others to dictate where a conversation ends. Meaning, are they satisfied to say yes? This is settled.
No, I wouldn't take it that far.
Because-
See, it's so for me, right? I mean, like I said in my synopsis, right? When without adequate context, when I say things like, "Hey, it's not rocket science," or any of these things, you are in a way insulting the intelligence of that other person, right? Has he or she not had an opportunity to consider these things before he or she came and talked to you about it, right? So it's a very offhand way of dismissing whatever is being talked about, right? So that is all I wouldn't. That's very extreme, right? And that's not practical. Like letting the other guy dictate the course of the conversation. So no, I'm not at all recommending that.
I have a point on the slide that you had about Martin Fowler.
Mm-hmm.
So, not to go to the Rubicon issue, but more to the point of, so what does this exactly drive home? As in, yes, there are two directions. We are aware of the two directions that exist. One is being called as a different situation, and the other one is called as a different situation.
Right.
Again, something we are aware of. So, what does this result? As in, how does this tie in with what you were saying is what I didn't quite get.
So, okay, what does it tie in with? It ties in with this. Like if people say that, this is business speak, deal with it, right? We use these stock phrases in our daily life. And occasionally, yes, we are all busy, we don't have all the time in the world. So we will end conversations on this note, right? And if
Lead over someone. And if I said something of this sort, like, be realistic. And if you said, whatever, and then I told you that you need to have a sense of humor, or the other way around. Either way, the argument would not be valid about the sense of humor. The stock phrase stays as it is, right?
Well, I see. The thing is, when the power relationship is the other way, right? Like if you are my boss, right, and if I told you, let's not over engineer it, right? There is less likelihood that you will back off because I said that. Because after all, you are my boss, right? You'll say, you'll say, why do you think I'm over engineering it? That is the most polite response from you. You might.
Can I just add to it? I think it's very important, the power equation business, because that actually affects the psyche of every individual who's working in that social group or in that environment. You guys might not have businesses, but when I joined ThoughtWorks in Chicago, one of the first things which struck me when I walked into the office, which was actually after 5 months of my joining because I was on the road, there were a lot of posters about Roy, and with all kind of weirdo and humorous comments sitting on those posters all over the office. And for me, it was a shock because I was also not used to that kind of culture. And then I realized when I attended the first staff meeting, there were at least 4 individuals who actually just ripped Roy apart on whatever he was saying. And it was public. It was like staff meeting, 60 people in that room, and he is being publicly beaten for whatever he has said. And knowing Roy, I mean, you guys know that he does not backs off so easily. So it was like a heated debate going on in that room. And I'm like, what the hell is going on, man? And people are just saying, Roy, you're just an idiot. And I'm not exaggerating, I'm not paraphrasing. These were the statements made. Roy, you are an idiot, you don't understand. And he would say, no, you are an idiot, you don't understand. And finally, in some of those arguments, he had to back off and he had to say, yes, you are right. I didn't think about it. And I think that conveys a very, very subtle thing that here what matters here is what information you have, who is right, and you can take on the person who has the supreme power as well. And I think that's a very important thing which happens. And that's why I think that's the power of that statement, that in that kind of power equation, you need to be, you need to first taking cognizance of that fact, and then doing things so that the other person who is supposedly have less power can feel comfortable.
And just to add, maybe somewhere when we use such stock phrases, lazy communication like you said, it also smacks of insincerity. It smacks of, okay, I haven't thought through what I want to respond, I just want to shrug you off.
Yep, exactly.
And that insincerity is what probably...
Yeah. Which is what I try to capture here somewhat, right? That it might not be just as simple as we don't want to waste a lot of time arguing and discussing.
Yeah. And I think that kind of gets to the other person. I mean, no matter what you say, your body language and tone will convey that you're just being insincere in the sense that you just don't want to carry on the conversation, either because you don't have enough context, or you just don't wish to, or you just wish to shrug off that person. And all of that combines to convey a...
And in a corporate culture like ours, those messages spread very fast and you lose credibility.
Yeah, exactly. I think also the person using that needs to be cognizant, like he said, that it actually can lead to his or her losing credibility.
So I think it's even more critical in an organization like ThoughtWorks because you don't have a standard hierarchy, whereas you could get away with these things. I mean, people would almost accept it as part and parcel in a standard hierarchical organization, whereas over here, since you don't have those clear demarcations, it's even more important that you keep that in mind.
Absolutely. And that's why I was when I realized that, it was like a very aha moment for me that, we talk about a lot of things when we try to judge what is the work culture of an organization, how hierarchical it is. You don't have to look at organization charts. You don't have to look at, how they address each other in emails, etc. This itself is a very good indicator, right? I mean, how comfortable people are at, kind of challenging their seniors, or not even challenging, even poking fun, maybe harmless fun, right? And how often does it go the other way around? And what is the reaction? Is it a forced reaction or it's a natural reaction?
An amazing talk, but it was not rocket science actually.
So one thing I trying to get more clarity on it. You said language and the words which we use are very important, and I know that you're talking in terms of these stock phrases. Have you encountered? Sorry. Have you encountered? I mean, would you want to elaborate on that?
Absolutely, I would love to. I mean, and we have time.
Please, I know it's not rocket science, but please don't elaborate too much.
Yeah. Okay, so from a very specific answer to that is, the BDD community that sprang out of ThoughtWorks, behavior-driven development. It's an offshoot, or let's say some sort of an incremental improvement over test-driven development, right? And one of the premises of, in a very, if you look at it from a very bare bones point of view, one might say, hey, instead of saying test some functionality, I'm now saying should do this under this, right? And we have created a whole branch of study called behavior-driven development. But that is the bare bones of it, right? But if you go to the premise, the theoretical premises of this is that when we start using should do this when this happens under these given, so given, when, then kind of thinking, when you start to think using that language, we can write better tests, right? So language influences thought, and there is a research on edge.org or com, which is supposed to be a high quality intellectual website, a lot of good research, etc. So they have a study which where an anthropologist went to different tribes, and he found that there are some I'm forgetting specific example, but okay, there was this example about this is very was very interesting for me at least. It's like how we classify things, right, based on our language. So, for example, there was an experiment conducted where people were given like a knife, a fork, and some food and some other items, right? And they were asked to classify or just arrange it on a table. And most of us who are exposed to modern civilization, we arrange it as you would arrange a dinner table, right? A plate with food on it and knife and fork, etc. But a different tribe, they arrange it very differently. They arrange the food separately, the utensils separately, and the weapons separately, right? So, because and there was the study went on to say that this can be traced to the language we use. If we have an abstraction called a dinner table, right, then all of these things fit well into a dinner table. But if you don't have that abstraction, then you might start classifying based on the primitives itself. And then he gave many more examples like that. So, and there is a brilliant book called Language in Thought and Action by Hayakawa, and so it was published in the 70s, but it's considered to be a classic, which basically talks about, one of the key phrases they use is the map is not the territory, right? So all languages are symbols, right? And symbols are, they stand for territory, they stand for reality, but they are not reality themselves. But when we lose sight of this, when we lose sight of this, for example, a very trivial and extreme example is, there is a riot when somebody, smears paint on a religious figure or somebody, right? Because you're substituting the symbol for what it really stands for.
So it looks like somewhere there's a danger in the abstraction, or too much abstraction.
Yes. Taking abstraction to be the reality. Believing that money, currency is wealth. Alright, thanks a lot for your wonderful participation.